Hi everyone, and thanks for joining this keynote. Today I'm going to be covering a little bit around the impact and the potential ROI for an enterprise exploring or looking to roll out chatbots built upon or utilizing artificial intelligence and natural language processing. If you've never heard me speak before, my name is Stewart Mackay, and no, I'm not a chatbot. I'm a real live human being. That said, I am a team lead in business development for CM.com, and my focus is exclusively to grow our footprint in the conversational AI space in sub-Saharan Africa. I've been with CM for about 5 years. I'm based in Johannesburg, and I'm absolutely passionate about AI, NLP, and specifically the marriage that exists between this field and the mobile phone. I believe that the mobile phone and the shift that we're seeing in customers demanding brands to be present on their chosen social messaging channel, coupled with a need to streamline and drive efficiency in their business operations, are some of the biggest catalysts in driving this technology adoption forward. So just very quickly, a little bit about who CM.com is. We've been around for quite a while. We were founded in 1999, actually built initially on the SMS messaging industry. But today we are essentially a software solutions organization that operates globally. We provide solutions around payments, ticketing, messaging, voice, and a number of other specialized solutions. Concerning AI and NLP, we've been doing that since 2005, mainly through some acquisitions that we've made. We are globally present. We're a growing organization, and we're listed on the Euronext since about the beginning of 2020 last year. We're also an accredited organization. We're rated by Gartner and Juniper in a number of different segments quite highly, and we take things like GDPR and ISO certifications quite seriously within our business. So before we get into the potential impacts and returns that we're seeing in enterprises getting through, implementing AI and NLP chatbots, it's important to realize that AI and NLP is still developing. It's not necessarily a perfect technology, and there's still a lot of research and development that's needed before AI and NLP can ultimately replace your entire staff complement. Without getting into too much of the tech lingo, it's worth noting that much of the challenge ultimately revolves around our use of and the development of our chosen spoken language. Language in the human sense is not binary. It's much more complex than we sometimes believe. And as humans, we have a lot more at our disposal when interpreting spoken language. And these are often complemented with other cues that we have in our disposal to understand conversations. These are obviously not new challenges. The first chatbot that came into existence was done in around 1966, which is more than half a century ago. But granted, a lot of the processing power and the memory that's required by computers to perform complex AI and NLP, as well as the developments in things like machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, and even AI in general, only happened much, much later. We're still not yet, though, at the stage where we can go through our daily lives conversing in natural language with a computer to solve everything that we need. That being said, there are already major potential areas for a positive impact in the enterprise utilizing NLP and AI-based chatbot solutions. But before you go down that road, there are a number of things that you need to do, and this because ultimately AI and NLP chatbots can impact your business in a number of different areas. Firstly, some of the things that we often see, not just within vendors out there, but also within customers that are looking to get buy-in when rolling out AI and NLP into their business, is that they have unrealistic expectations. So, one of the first things that we would state is look for realistic gains and set realistic expectations around things like what the potential ROIs are that you can generate. As an example, we've seen some customers achieving 50% or more return on investment in the form of efficiency gains, or things like call deflection from the contact center to handing conversations into the chatbot. But those are generally considered outliers. A more realistic range and more common range that we see is somewhere between 10 and 30%. And I'll cover more on that a little bit later in one of my next slides. Chatbots ultimately can handle many business processes from start to finish, and there's a lot of impact potential there. But you should still ultimately have humans involved in a number of these different processes, especially depending on where you are in your level of implementation. If you're in the early stage of rolling out AI or NLP based chatbots, chances are that a lot of the dialogues that you're going to create are still going to require some level of human interaction. So it's important to consider what the impact is there around automation, and ultimately where there's a need for human intervention. You should be looking at areas in your business where a chatbot can impact things like friction and pain positively. So things like forms handling and processes around that are really good, as well as areas resulting in customer frustration. As an example, how frustrated do you get when your insurance company emails you a claim form to download, print, and complete in order to submit a claim? That's a business process right there, which can be automated with NLP, AI, and messaging into a more frictionless process. We actually have a South African WhatsApp business customer in this space, which reduced their claims processing time from 2 weeks to a matter of hours. To ultimately, though, deliver personalized, contextually aware implementations of AI and NLP that go beyond answering things like simple Q&A or FAQs. You also need to consider the impact of integration into your existing business systems. Invariably, you're going to need or want to provide different answers to the same question depending on different contextual variables. Maybe it's something like seasonality, or the time of day a query comes in, the channel it comes in over, or perhaps even the customer's loyalty or card status. Understanding where context necessitates a different response or process is obviously important. You then also need to determine whether access to customer data in your business systems is required in order to deliver that contextually relevant experience. So that then also has a link to an impact on things like data security. What data is needed? Where is it going to be stored? How will it be used? And ultimately the securing of that data. You also need to understand whether or not the business process requires you to authenticate users and how you can do so intelligently to protect against things like SIM swap or stolen phone scenarios. Ultimately, though, once you started to invest in AI or NLP chatbots, you will also need to ensure that you implement processes, systems, and analytics which proactively identify and alert you of gaps and changes in your customer queries. Your business is obviously dynamic, and so are your customers' needs and demands. So, as an example, we've seen, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, one of our online UK fashion retailers called Misguided experienced a 20% increase in inbound support requests during the pandemic, and more specifically during things like lockdown. Moreover, the questions that the clients were asking had changed significantly due to the impact of COVID-19 and lockdown. Things like operating hours, had changed during lockdown. Warehousing and delivery restraints were introduced, and ultimately, using analytics and AI driven gap analysis, they were able to proactively address the missing Q&A, adjust operating hours, and make changes in their refund policy from 30 to 60 days, all based on data and intelligence ultimately that was gathered by the chatbot and fed back to them through dashboards and alerts. Lastly, but definitely not least important, is the impact on user experience. Ultimately, a chatbot is only as good as the value it provides, and the value is directly linked to the quality of its responses, the length of its conversation dialogues, its ability to get a human involved when that's required, and its ability to learn. Now, while building a chatbot can be made simple and easy to manage using the right platform, it's most certainly not done without proper planning and is generally rolled out in a systematic manner. So to that end, what we typically find and encourage in our implementations with our customers is an implementation maturity model that you see on screen. Basically, to bring the chatbot to life into the business in a way where scaling out is easy and makes sense, but also in a manner where the business can start generating return on investment immediately, literally from day one. So that means that the business would start addressing things like Q&A and FAQs and basic dialogue type queries where content and some of the business processes already usually exist and are easy to move into the chatbot environment, but where things like personalization or integration are not yet required. We then start seeing clients moving up the ladder where they start to look to add more personalization and context into their user journeys so that ultimately they can address queries relating to specific issues within specific clients or scenarios, but not necessarily allowing the bot to fully complete the job that's required, and ultimately still requiring some level of handover to a human agent to finalize the transaction. Clients then start focusing more of their attention around looking at the chatbot to fully automate process and simplification of key user journeys without the need for agent-based assistance. It's at this stage where extensive integration is usually required into client backend systems to not just collect or update records, but ultimately to complete tasks in full. The final step in that maturity model is more of an extension of the third step, and it's really where the business looks to make that experience completely channel agnostic and seamlessly integrated into both internal as well as external third-party systems. The bulk of what we see, though, within our client base and also within the industry in general, are that clients generally sit within the second and third tiers, where they've moved beyond the ability to handle things like basic Q&A and handling of FAQs into more sort of personalized journeys where they're utilizing AI and NLP to provide more of an automated type service offering. The importance of this slide, though, is really to show you that the impact of generating return is possible ultimately from day one and grows over time as you scale out your operation and your implementation of AI and NLP chatbots into your business. It's not something that you need to spend 6 or 12 months developing and only wait to generate ROI after that period. You can implement it in a way that you can start generating those returns right from day one. So, what are the potential returns to be gained? I've touched on a couple of these areas earlier, but let's provide some more context. So the ROI of AI and NLP chatbots is not as simplistic as providing or creating efficiency. Yes, that's one of the big areas, but it's not the only one. One of the biggest problems that are faced in customer contact centers or in customer service in general, and particularly in the African economy, is that organizations have contact centers taking massive strain. Call volumes and call queues are high, processes are inefficient, and information is not quickly obtainable for either the client or the employee. More often than not, organizations tend to just add more staff to the problem, but that's not sustainable, not in the long term anyway. It's also been estimated that employees spend as much as about 30% of their day trying to find information. So if your own employees are struggling with this, then your customers ultimately are too. So to that end, implementing an efficient self-service strategy or automation strategy makes complete sense and can improve, or it will improve, service experience levels. Conversion rates is quite an interesting measurement. Most of the providers of chatbots out there tend to focus on service on the service side of the business and don't really look at client acquisition as much as some of the lesser providers. But also a lot of customers that we speak to don't really consider that. It is a part of the business ultimately that the chatbot has the ability to assist with, in the sense that it can reach out to customers or be tied to other engagement strategies like SMS or email. So we've, as an example, got a client in the pet insurance space who increased their online conversion rates by 35% by proactively reaching out to the user on the website through an automated chatbot type experience. And they actually also rolled out a TV campaign, which then tied the TV campaign back to the chatbot, and those conversion rates were ultimately even double that. So the kind of rationale behind that is that if the conversation feels good to the consumer, chances are that the client is going to purchase. And that type of thinking can be implemented in a lot of businesses, telcos, ISPs, e-commerce, insurance, any service really where a consumer is using the web experience to educate themselves before they buy is a potential implementation or potential area where you can look at improving conversion rates. A lot of the organizations that we speak to balk at the prospect of reducing live contact channels in their business, promoting self-service or even digitizing certain processes, with the worry that they're going to miss the mark on delivering service excellence. If you're able to consider and understand what customers are trying to achieve, though, you can focus on improving self-service and only present live channels to solve the most complicated customer questions and problems. Again, we have clients who have been able to achieve as much as 50% reduction in live contact, with 90% of service questions answered via self-service. When you do that, it almost forces, in fact, it does force your entire organization to focus on customer journeys, and also it forces your organization to start rearranging your website from what customers may find to be, disarrayed and non-organized stores of information into proactive dialogues, meeting the customer need at every turn in the conversation, and ultimately being able to address gaps in almost real time. This ultimately, increases service speed and customer satisfaction, which again then, comes back to higher NPS scores as an example. So, for most organizations, though, and I touched on it at the beginning of the slide, the single biggest benefit and justification of an AI and NLP-based implementation is a reduction in the costs associated with service provisioning. Now, A lot of people might treat that statement negatively and assume that this translates into retrenchment in the service center. That's not the case at all. So Africa's an economy where we've already got high unemployment rates. That's the last thing that anybody wants to achieve. But if you go and read the research out there, there's a lot of research that supports the statement that actually when organizations implement AI and NLP based solutions into the contact center, they've absolutely got no intention in reducing their staff complement. Instead, they're wanting to utilize those staff members to handle more specific or complex or more complex tasks. One of the research papers I've read on that subject was one drafted by a company called LogMeIn, and they found that as many as 65% of organizations who were looking to reduce their service cost were, doing so with that intention. In other words, not reducing headcount, but utilizing the staff in other areas. That efficiency gain, though, is most certainly tied to a monetary value, which ultimately is determined by the amount of time saved by deflecting agent-assisted service to self-service. So, a question we get asked all the time is, what can you expect to gain in that respect? And it very much depends on the client, the industry, the implementation, and also where they are in that maturity model step-up process that you saw on an earlier slide. An internet service provider or a telco might have a higher level of deflection rate than, for instance, a bank, purely based on the fact that an ISP, as an example, when you phone an ISP and you've got a technical problem, they kind of take you through a scripted process to solve your issue. So, that type of implementation, if that's the bulk of your queries coming in, could have a higher return than something that is less structured in that sort of sense. Ultimately, though, what we've seen in implementations is that some organizations, yes, sure, they can get 50% ROI savings. A more realistic expectation, though, is a range of between 10 and 30%. So, where 10% is a conservative view, 20% is kind of more the average, and then 30% is, not necessarily opportunistic, but it's probably more closely tied to a later stage in the maturity model that we spoke about earlier. I'd like to conclude. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time with these keynotes, but I'd like to conclude just by stating, and I hope I've shown you that while there remain to be challenges within the AI and NLP chatbot space, there are already, and there have been for some time, significant opportunities for an enterprise looking to create efficiency and become more customer centric, and even improve things like conversion and increase customer satisfaction rates, as long as you can also carefully consider the impact areas of your business and the challenges that you're likely to face during implementation. We do have a virtual stand at this conference. Feel free to stop by that virtual stand if you've got any questions or comments. I'm also going to remain online here for a little while to address any burning questions that you might have. But yeah, thanks ultimately for joining, and I look forward to ultimately hopefully meeting you at our virtual stand. Thanks again.